Poor Cary Grant was a little nervous about it because I'm very short-sighted, and of course I couldn't wear my glasses driving. So it was all he could do to look nonchalant and relaxed.
Grace Kelly lived a life most people only dream of. Hollywood fame, timeless beauty, and a royal title that turned her into a real-life princess. To the world, it looked like a perfect ending, but perfection can be deceiving. Because behind the palace walls, there were choices, and behind those choices, there were men she never truly forgot. In her final years, those closest to her began to notice something quiet, almost unspoken, a memory she carried, not of a crown, but of a feeling she once had, a love that didn't fade with time. And in this video, we follow that story, to the one man she truly loved. The first love she lost, Don Richardson. Before the cameras, before the gowns, before the world ever knew her name, Grace Kelly experienced a kind of love that was simple, direct, and unguarded. His name was Don Richardson. He wasn't a Hollywood legend or a powerful figure. He was her acting teacher, grounded, passionate, and deeply committed to the craft. But more importantly, he saw her not as an image, but as a person. And for Grace, that mattered. Their connection grew quietly, away from attention and expectation. With him, she didn't have to perform. She didn't have to be perfect. She could simply be herself, something that would become increasingly rare in her life. In time, their relationship deepened into something serious, real. They became engaged. It could have been a different life entirely, a quieter life, a simpler one without cameras, without royalty, without the constant weight of being watched, a life where love wasn't questioned, only lived. But that life was never truly hers to choose. Her family saw things differently. To them, Richardson wasn't the right match. He didn't carry the status, the security, or the future they had envisioned for her. And in a family where expectations were not suggestions but standards, their disapproval carried weight. Too much weight. Grace faced a choice, not between two men, but between love and belonging. And in the end, she let him go. Not because the feeling wasn't real, but because, for the first time, she learned that sometimes love alone isn't enough. And once a woman learns that, she never loves quite the same way again. The illusion of Hollywood love. By the time Grace Kelly arrived in Hollywood, she had already learned a quiet but lasting truth. Love could be real, and still not be enough. And Hollywood, in many ways, only confirmed it. She quickly became one of the most desired women in the industry. Directors praised her discipline. Audiences were captivated by her elegance, and the men around her noticed everything. On the set of Monaco, she worked alongside Gable, a man whose presence carried both charm and authority. Their chemistry was undeniable, and whispers of something more began to follow them. Whether real or imagined, it added to the growing image of Grace as someone constantly surrounded by admiration. Then came Gary Cooper during High Noon. Older, quieter, and deeply respected, Cooper shared a different kind of connection with her, one built on mutual understanding rather than excitement. Again, there were rumors. Again, nothing lasting. And with Ray Milland in Dial M for Murder, the pattern repeated itself. Closeness, speculation, and then distance. From the outside, it looked like a life full of romance. But inside, it felt very different. Because none of these connections gave her what she had once known with Don Richardson. None offered that sense of being fully seen, fully understood, without expectation or performance. Instead, they existed in a world where everything was heightened. Emotion, attention, desire, but rarely grounded in something real. Grace wasn't searching for admiration. She already had that. She was searching for something quieter, something certain, and the more Hollywood offered her everything, the more she began to feel that something essential was missing. Because sometimes, The brightest lights create the deepest shadows. The man she almost chose. William Holden. By the time Grace Kelly met William Holden, something in her had already changed. She was no longer the young woman who believed love would simply fall into place. She had seen too much, felt too much, and learned, quietly, that timing, expectation, and reality could reshape even the strongest emotions. But with Holden, it felt different. They worked together on The Country Girl, a film that demanded emotional honesty. And somewhere between the long hours, the difficult scenes, and the quiet moments in between, a connection began to form. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. Holden wasn't trying to impress her. He didn't need to. There was a grounded confidence about him, a sense that he understood both the beauty and the cost of the life they were living. And for Grace, that kind of understanding mattered more than charm. For the first time since her early years, she wasn't just admired, she was met. Their connection carried something rare: mutual respect, shared ambition, and a quiet emotional alignment that felt sustainable. This wasn't just attraction. This was the kind of bond that could have grown into something lasting, a real life. And for a moment, it almost did. But life, as Grace had already learned, rarely moves in a straight line. Differences began to surface, not dramatic ones, but meaningful ones: values, expectations, visions of the future. The kind of differences that don't break a moment, but slowly reshape what's possible. And so, once again, she faced a familiar reality. Not all love is meant to stay. Not all connections are meant to become a life. She didn't lose William Holden. She chose not to build a future with him. And sometimes, that kind of choice lingers longer than loss. The man who understood her. Cary Grant. When Grace Kelly met Cary Grant, something shifted. Quietly, almost imperceptibly. There was no rush, no intensity that needed to prove itself, no performance, just ease. They came together during the filming of To Catch a Thief, set against the sunlit backdrop of the French Riviera. It was a story built on charm and intrigue, but what unfolded between them felt far more natural than scripted. Cary Grant was different from the men who had come before him. He didn't try to impress Grace. He didn't pursue her with urgency or expectation. Instead, he met her where she was, with intelligence, wit, and a kind of emotional calm that felt safe. And for Grace, that mattered more than anything. With him, she didn't have to measure her words. She didn't have to hold anything back. Conversations flowed without effort. Silences felt comfortable, not heavy. There was a balance between them. Two people who understood not just the world around them, but the quiet pressures within it. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't adapting to someone else. She was simply herself. And perhaps that's why their connection has lingered in memory far longer than many others. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was complete in a way that didn't demand explanation. But life, once again, moved in its own direction. There were timing issues, life paths pulling in different ways, and the kind of unspoken understanding that sometimes something meaningful doesn't need to become permanent to remain important. They didn't build a future together, but what they shared didn't fade. Because some connections don't end. They settle quietly into the part of you that remembers what it felt like to be understood. And once you've felt that, you never quite forget it. The choice that changed everything. Prince Rainier III. In 1955, during the Cannes Film Festival, Grace Kelly was introduced to a man whose world could not have been more different from Hollywood. His name was Prince Rainier III. He wasn't part of the film industry. He didn't belong to the world of scripts, lights, or fleeting connections. He represented something else entirely: structure, legacy, and a future already defined. Their meeting was formal at first, polite, almost reserved. But what followed was something far more intentional than anything Grace had experienced before. Letters were exchanged, conversations deepened, and unlike the emotional uncertainty of her past relationships, this connection came with clarity. Rainier offered something no one else had: certainty, a defined role, a clear future, a life that would not shift with public opinion or passing emotion. With him, Grace wouldn't have to wonder where she stood or what came next. And after years of navigating love that felt uncertain, that kind of stability carried its own kind of appeal. But it also came with a cost. To accept his world, she would have to leave her own behind. Not gradually, completely. Hollywood would end. Her career would stop. The version of herself that had existed freely, choosing roles, building connections, exploring life, would be replaced by something far more structured. A princess, a symbol, a responsibility. And in 1956, she made that choice. She married Prince Rainier in what the world would call a fairy tale. But beneath the celebration, there was something quieter. Because this wasn't just a marriage. It was a decision between two kinds of lives. One built on feeling, the other built on certainty. And Grace Kelly, for the first time, chose certainty. And sometimes, the life we choose is not the same as the love we remember. The life she lived, the love she carried. After the wedding, the world saw a dream fulfilled. Grace Kelly had become Princess Grace of Monaco, an American star transformed into European royalty. The images were perfect. The life appeared complete. But real life doesn't unfold in photographs. Behind the palace walls, her days became structured, defined by duty rather than discovery. There were ceremonies, responsibilities, expectations, each one shaping the role she had chosen. She embraced them with dignity, just as the world expected her to. She became a devoted mother, a respected figure, a symbol of elegance that never seemed to fade. And yet, something had changed. The freedom she once had, the ability to choose, to move, to explore her own identity, slowly became a memory. Hollywood, with all its imperfections, had given her a sense of expression. In Monaco, that part of her life no longer existed. She rarely spoke of it openly, but those closest to her noticed the quiet moments, the pauses, the way she would sometimes drift into reflection, as if revisiting something only she could see. Not regret, but remembrance. Because, while she had chosen a life of stability, the heart doesn't always follow the same path as the decisions we make. And somewhere within her, certain feelings never fully disappeared. Not loudly, not painfully, just quietly present. The kind of memory that doesn't interrupt your life, but never fully leaves it either. She had everything the world defines as happiness. And in many ways, she was happy. But happiness and completeness are not always the same thing. Because sometimes, a person can build a beautiful life and still carry a love that belonged to another time. And the most powerful feelings are often the ones we never needed to explain. The one man she truly loved, Cary Grant. In the final years of Grace Kelly's life, something began to change. Not in what she said, but in what she allowed to be remembered. There were no dramatic confessions, no public declarations, just quiet reflections, conversations with those she trusted, moments where the past seemed closer than the present. And in those moments, a pattern began to emerge. She spoke of her life with respect, of her role with dignity, of her marriage with understanding. But when certain names were mentioned, when certain memories resurfaced, there was a softness in her expression that didn't quite belong to duty or obligation. It belonged to something else, something earlier, something real. Among all the men who had passed through her life, the ones who admired her, pursued her, even the one she chose, there was one connection that never seemed to fade in the same way. Not because it lasted, but because it didn't need to. That man was Cary Grant. With him, she had experienced something rare, an ease that didn't require effort, an understanding that didn't need explanation. He didn't represent a role she had to step into or a life she had to adjust to. He simply met her, as she was. And perhaps that's why, even years later, his presence remained, not in her life, but in her memory, unchanged, untouched by time. She didn't build a future with him. She didn't share a life with him. But she carried something with her that never fully disappeared. And in the end, that may have mattered more. Because the man she married gave her a title, a family, a place in history. But the man she truly loved gave her a moment in time where she didn't have to become anything else. She could simply be. And sometimes, that is the love that stays with us the longest. Grace Kelly's life reminds us of something deeply human, that the choices we make don't always erase the feelings we once had. She lived a remarkable life. She fulfilled a destiny most could never imagine. And yet, like all of us, she carried memories that belonged to a different path. Perhaps that's what makes her story so timeless. Not the crown, not the fame, but the quiet truth that love isn't always about who stays. Sometimes it's about who never truly leaves. If this story stayed with you, let me know where you're watching from. And if you believe some loves never fade, subscribe, because there are more stories like this waiting for you.